Our next guest was a long-time Londoner, born and raised here and a fixture on the London music scene in the early 1970s. Garwood Wallace, sometimes known as Twitch, was a single performer, performed in a very excellent local band called Redwood, and went on to move to the big city and seek fame and fortune, and had some recording success with a band, an act called Twitch, an album called Twitch and Shout. I've got a copy of that album right here. Can we get a can we see that? You see that? That's Garwood there. Yeah. Doesn't look exactly like that today. He joins me on the program. Very nice to have you back in the city, and great to see you again.
Good to see you.
Garwood, I want to ask you a little bit about, I want to go back and talk about the good old days for a moment, and then I want to talk about what you're doing now, because it's a fascinating story, a fascinating project that you're involved in. You were part of that, not a renaissance in London, but certainly a flowering of music in the early 1970s, early and mid-1970s. There were a lot of fine musicians that were performing in this area here, and you were certainly very much a part of that. Good place to work in those days?
Well, it was. London had a very, very good music scene. There was the rock scene of musicians that, of course, you were involved in, and then there was the more acoustic folk-based stuff that I was involved in for a while there, like at Smales Pace and so forth. And I never exactly fit in to either camp, and I kind of felt like the outsider in both those. But I suppose that's one of the reasons why I eventually moved on. But certainly when I was here, I dipped into either camp whenever I could, and I always found it to be quite helpful. I know when I was playing at Smales Pace, there was a time when Willie P. Bennett and I were booked together to play a lot of places around the city, and we worked, and I did a lot of gigs at Smales Pace and that. And then, of course, when I moved into rock and roll, playing with Redwood, as you mentioned, it was very vibrant. There was a lot of it was very eclectic, but it was, as it is now, very, very self-supportive. I was at the Jack Richardson Awards the other night, and I got a chance to see my favorite band, Thundermug, and brought into the Hall of Fame, and it was an absolute joy. And what I saw from the whole awards ceremony was the different styles of music in London, and as somebody who just moved back, I'm sort of becoming more aware of what's going on now. And it's the same as it was then. It's this sense of, we're London, and we count for something. And it's very, very satisfying to watch that and to be a part of.
I know you were noted, and still are, for being a prolific creator of music, and I remember very vividly something you said to me more than 30 years ago. We were talking about writing tunes, which I did a little bit of, and for me it was a chore. It was get out the hammer and saw and build the song. and I remember very clearly you said to me that your approach was entirely different, that when you had a song, you simply had to create it. You had no choice. It wasn't building something. It just sort of flowed, and you had to mold it and move it, and it came out. And if that meant you stayed up all night, then you stayed up all night, that the song was in there and simply had to get out. That always stuck with me. Do you still do that? Do you still create like that?
I don't know that you have a choice in that. I think everybody has a different way of doing it. I mean, it's the same like with some people write the lyrics first or the music first and so forth. But as far as the approach, I know what you're talking about. To me, it's I think somebody once said creativity applied is 95%, pardon me, 5% inspiration and 95% perspiration. I would have to agree with that, at least as far as my own approach. I like the idea of getting the moment, getting the feel of the germ of the thing, and then once it's out, then you can apply the nuts and bolts to it. I know my good friend Bob Sagarini referred to pop songwriting. We were talking about this just the other day. He says, we're not artists as much as we are builders. We're making furniture. Pop music has certain structures and certain ways that it happens, and a lot of times you're simply putting the pieces together and adding your element to it to make it unique. To answer your question, I think yeah, I still do it that way. I don't know that I have any choice in the matter. I mean, sometimes you write the song so you can get some sleep that night.
I want to ask you about Twitch, about the band Twitch, and about the album. Yeah. It turns out that our producer, Marilyn Buggy, is a huge fan of yours, and when she found out you were going to on the program today, they told me that she literally was dancing around the control room.
Yeah, well,
I know the band did have a fair amount of success, based out of Toronto, and by then you moved to Toronto.
That's right.
What was it like to be part of that Toronto scene, having come from, in many senses, sort of the small town here, and now you're on a big stage in the big city?
Well, it had a touch of classic showbiz story to it, I mean, I went down there with the idea that I had an idea. just go back a little. You have to remember, this is when punk music was starting to coalesce, the punk scene starting to coalesce into what became known as the new wave scene. And some people would argue that by processing itself into new wave, it had some of its rough edges knocked off, not always to good effect. That in fact some of the rawness was taken away to make it accessible to radio and so forth. I don't know. I think a certain amount of processing helps any kind of music. And when we went down there, we went through the process of trying to put this band together. My friend Brian, who is another Londoner, Brian Pratt. I get $1 for every time I say his name on the show.
The Jinx Man.
Yes, that's right.
Used to be known as the Jinx Man.
Yeah.